So I already talked about what warframes are in general, but not each warframe. So that is what I am here to do today. So there are a total of 61 playable warframes on top of one non-playable warframe. So I'm going to talk about each one of their stories and in a sense kind of retell it in a more simple way. This will include everything I think that is relevant. Now I did a whole lot of research for this, so I hope everything is quite accurate, and if it's not, please let me know so I can have it changed for the future. I just want to say there are some possible spoilers for many things in the game, so you should at least play the second dream before you continue. I personally would also recommend at least playing through the sacrifice and maybe all of the warframe quests. This is just to avoid spoilers because you do not want to be spoiled and I do not want to be the spoiler. So this is my final spoiler warning. So to start this off, warframes were once people who got hit with infestation. Yeah, that's pretty much a simple version of what they are. Also keep in mind quite a few warframes have no lore because warframes getting a whole backstory is kind of recent in a sense, I guess. Some of the warframes were made back like ages ago, so that was probably why they don't really have much lore. As for telling the lore, I will summarize it for the parts that need to be known. There is also a fan canon out there, but for the most part I won't mention it unless it is a wide consensus through the community with it being true or not. So with that being said, let's begin. Starting off with Ashe, his story starts in the Orcan era as most of these do. There was an assassination school known as Scoria. In this school, they idolized Ashe, as he was the perfect assassin, near flawless to be exact. He was always the person they went to when they really needed something done. Enter brothers Dom and Pilio de Nos. They were a part of the Scoria as noteworthy students. Pilio wasn't as gifted with grace and clarity as Dom was, but he still managed to find success in the Scoria. So during a mission, Dom was captured by his target and no one heard from him. So the Scoria deemed that as a bad thing. So of course, they sent out Pilio to go find him and presumably take him out. But because the Scoria didn't trust him, Ashe went with Pilio. That brought the pair to Mars, which to be expected required Ashe to kill quite a few guys. But this led to a meeting with Leo de Nos, Pilio and Dom's father. Now, from my understanding, there has been a crystal given by the Scoria that removed memories. During this time, Leo removed Dom's and Pilio still had his. Anyway, Leo was the one who kidnapped Dom, who essentially saved him from the Scoria. So seeing both Leo and Dom sitting there, Ashe knew exactly what this all was. So he essentially just let them go. Ashe destroyed the crystal on Pilio's head, hence defying the Scoria. It is yet to be discovered as to why Ashe did this. It could also just be because he was once human, just like every other warframe, or he could have had a secret vendetta against the Scoria, since we know they weren't really safe from Ashe in the collapse. But that's all really speculation. Now, one thing to keep in mind, there may be a potential female version of Ashe out there somewhere, or at least lore-wise, because there were ideas of having Ashe be female in the game, which as you can see was scrapped. But it doesn't mean that it can't return as just a tiny bit of lore. Maybe it was a prototype, or maybe even another model. We don't know, or just maybe it'll never exist. Who knows? So this is the tale of Telamon. The Temple Telamon, or also known as the Telamons, was a fanatic cult that worshipped a great stone destroyer, which was essentially a giant stone, or asteroid. These cultists believed that an arrival of an asteroid would insinuate great destruction to bring about a great rebirth of the world. They chanted this in hopes to spread the word, but the Orcan, of course, ignored them as they saw no real threat. So the logical thing to do was throw an asteroid at Earth. The Telamon put thrusters and other just modifications onto this asteroid to steer it towards Earth for the Great Rebirth. This is where Atlas comes in, which in fact he does in a way go against the Telamon people's beliefs. He got on top of the asteroid and attempted to disable the thrusters while the Telamons watched. This overall did not help because the thrusters may have stopped, but the trajectory of the asteroid didn't, because of, physics and stuff like that. So Atlas eventually killed the Telamon people on top of the asteroid by using Petrify. He then turned them into rock golems to continue the slaughter. This then allowed him to focus on destroying the faults in the rock. It took some time, but as soon as he found the right spot, he was able to evaporate the whole asteroid, saving Earth. But that was pretty much everything for his main story right there. But some other things to mention is he is inspired by Atlas from Greek mythology, which that Atlas was pretty much a rock guy as well and held a giant rock for some time, I believe. His petrify ability is also inspired by Medusa, which is the snake-headed lady that turns people into stone when you look at her. And lastly, his passive ability was inspired by Antaeus, who loved wrestling but just couldn't get knocked down as long as he was touching the ground, which seems actually really interesting as a possible power. Banshee doesn't have anything when it comes to actual lore that I could find. We could guess that she is based on the mythological Banshee from mythology and stuff like that, but I don't know what myths are actually believed in when it comes to the Warframe lore, and plus there is totally a real green Banshee out there, so take all this as you will. Baruuk is also one of the many frames that don't have much lore. All we really know is he tries to avoid conflict whenever possible, but when he is pushed to fighting, he is really damn good at it, and he can pretty much just take out whoever he needs to on his own. Now, my lovely Caliban was made as an amalgamation of sentient and Warframe. He isn't fully sentient, but made up of sentient parts, if that makes sense. So his main purpose was to destroy the Tenno for the sentience, and of course was made by Era in the Old War. It's not really clear how it became one of our controllable Warframes, but we do know that sometime in the Old Peace, when the treaty was brokered, Caliban Prime was kind of made off of that treaty. So that's kind of what happened, and in this red text, as you can see, it does say that Ballas did none of the work and just took all the credit. So yep, that sounds like a Ballas thing to do. So Chroma doesn't have any official lore as far as I can see, but there is some fan theories I heard about, like he could have been formed in the void similar to Zaku, but with known warframes like Saren or Volt. And another one was that he killed a sentient or maybe a dragon and wears its skin, which is part of its design now. I'm not fully sure, but that is really all I found. Citrine was a guardian of Belric and Rania, who at the time were on Deimos. During this time, sentients were invading the Origin system, and to protect from the invasion, Belric and Rania set off a giant biobomb, nearly infesting the whole moon. Instead of running away, Citrine sacrificed herself to save Belric and Rania by putting them into crystals of her own making. Many years later, smugglers discovered that these crystals of Belric and Rania would end up creating a void tunnel when moved away from each other, as said on the wiki, linking the two together as a conceptual embodiment of their love. The tunnel also creates some of the Citrine's prismatic gems, essentially preserving her likeness as well, like she did with Belric and Rania. So that's pretty much everything there is with Belric and Rania. I know I said their names probably a little too much, but that's fine, because that brings us to present day where Till Rigor is actually going after the crystals for the genes from those two people. And he wants these genes for the Grineer, or his tubemen, and Arteno just goes and fights him off at Tiana Pass. He eventually decided that he just wanted to destroy the crystals, and we of course prevented that. Now, this little part isn't a huge thing with Citrine's lore, but I feel like it is a little bit good to know. Scio 9 was crafted by the Orkin for sensitive operations and missions where he could take advantage of his sniping powers, but something didn't happen and he just never got a name, and he also disappeared during the collapse for some reason. Before I start this story, keep in mind in this story Dagath didn't really have a name, or people didn't use it. She gets one later on in the story, but to avoid confusion, I will still call her Dagath. So Dagath was originally a Dak soldier. Technically, she was just a cavalry woman. She served a couple known as Corfo and Aurelia, but weirdly, she was their secret lover. Yeah, I don't know how that all works, but it's interesting to think about, I guess. During her travels with the couple, she was given a horse, but under one condition. Dagath was not allowed to name this horse in fear she would grow attached to it. Unfortunately, that is exactly what happened with the horse's name being Rock Holly. When the couple found out, they were not happy, to say the least, so they planned to get the horse killed accidentally, freeing them from blame. This resulted in Dagath being extremely injured, pretty much almost dying, so the couple went to the Orcan executor Ballas and begged him to keep Dagath alive, so he turned her into a warframe. So when Dagath came back, she was not the same. She lost her emotions and just stood idly, staring at the couple with a forever smile. Then this resulted in the secret relationship between the couple and Dagath to be cut off, only for her to be given to a facility where her head was burned off with a disintegration beam. This was intended for Dagath to die, but all it did was just leave a big hole in her head. She was restrained during this, so that's probably why she didn't kill the people while doing this. But like I said, she did survive and ended up climbing out of the trash, and it just so happened to be on the night of Naboris. Then she started wandering around with the plan on hunting down the Orcan couple that did this to her. Using her new Warframe powers, she managed to summon a ghostly form of her horse Rakali, and in that time she did manage to steal a whip blade from the facility overseer. Then she inevitably found the couple and slayed them, leaving them faceless just like her, and then eventually Dagath would just start wandering around, which led to a meeting with Grandmother. At the time, Grandmother had a name, and her name was Dagath. That is where our faceless Warframe got her name. Dagath would want a gift as for the Night of Naboris tradition, so Grandmother gifted her her own name to the Warframe. This decided that Grandmother would be called Grandmother and the Warframe be called Dagath. It is said that Dagath would have probably killed Grandmother if it wasn't for the name, so yeah. But anyway, gaining this name, this gave Dagath a purpose to show everyone their sins and to be ready to essentially deliver death to people because of their sins, or badly hurt them. Other than that, Dagath was themed after the Headless Horseman, so yeah, I guess you can take that as you will. Now to start off, Dante was one of the few Warframes that didn't go incredibly feral from my understanding, even though he just could not speak, but he didn't let his intelligence waver. This made him such a valuable asset to some people, especially Albrecht Entrati and Drusus Levirian. So Dante was known as a historian. In fact, he was one of the main guys that helped get exhibits and everything set up for the Levirian. Yeah, the museum that no one really goes to, yeah, Dante helped with that. This is what led to him being close with Drusus Levirian. His friendship also helped him befriend Lloyd, Albrecht Entrati's assistant. I think he was kind of friends with Albrecht, but not as much as Lloyd and Drusus. Now, writing was his talking. He did a lot of writing, and all that he did was magical. Not a word was written without purpose. This possibly made him one of the best writers of the time, but he really used his writing to his advantage. He wrote a book on ancient Earth archaeology. My guess would be that he is talking about either dinosaurs or like animals from this present day. Yeah, I'm not sure. This fascination with the archaeology was another reason he grew close to Albrecht and Lloyd, as the whole Entrati family was actually fascinated with this stuff as well. But after years passed, these friendships kind of take a dark turn and, in a way, actually created the downfall of Dante. So eventually, Lloyd and Albrecht disappeared, but as we know, Albrecht went to 1999 and Lloyd went into cryosleep for the Kalimos protocol. But obviously, Dante didn't know this, so he went searching for both Albrecht and Lloyd. This brought him to presumably the Sanctum Anatomica in search of the people whom he grew close with. There he found the Necromex going rogue and speaking a unique language known as Void Tongue. Dante didn't know what this was at all and what this even entailed, but he was really fascinated, and the knowledge, it just started reeling him in. But what really tempted Dante was a special book. This book is perceived to be by many the mocking or scathing whisper, or the indifference. But anyway, the temptation stopped as Drusus eventually talked Dante out of the knowledge and said that it is not good knowledge, but it led to Dante taking his own life. Yeah, that didn't really work, as the indifference just prevented it. Instead, he was changed with every fiber of his being, also transferring him into an unknown place. His mind was still intact, but only enough for Void Tongue to be repeated constantly, making it the only thing he ever heard, because it wanted to be heard. So yeah, that's Dante. So Ember herself doesn't have lore per se, But there is a story behind her insinuating who she may have been before becoming a Warframe. There's a lady named Colleen. She essentially was one of, if not the only one, to discover the children on the Zariman. When she discovered this, she did get injured with a burn to her head, which potentially was from the void powers of the kids. Other than that, it wasn't really said what happened to her because, you know, she did kind of disobey orders according to the people there. And it was pretty much just a small conversation, but we really don't know what happened to her. But really, it's just all speculation whether she's Ember or not. But I do want to point out that there was a male Ember in the beta of Warframe that you veterans may remember. It may not be directly correlated to the lore itself, but I feel like it is good to mention as it may be linked to lore eventually. I highly doubt it. Or it may not, and male Ember's existence could just be wiped out of everyone's brain eventually. Equinox is another Warframe without lore. You know, it would be obvious to think that she was at least designed or inspired by day and night because, you know, that's what she is, but that's pretty much all we know. So Excalibur, for the most part, has no lore, other than the fact he was inspired by Alexander the Great and the story of the Excalibur sword. Other than that, all we know for certain is that he is the very first Warframe made, which makes sense since Excalibur Prime was made and founding players got to have it and stuff, so that's kind of something, and they were the first players, so that does make a little bit of sense. Also, one is on Tau, so that's also something. Other than that, his other counterpart, Excalibur Umbra, is where the lore actually comes in. So Umbra was originally an Orcan Dax, serving the Orcan as the Dax do. Well, he eventually found out that Ballas was planning to betray the Orcan. Umbra didn't plan on keeping this secret, so Ballas had to act fast, which brought him to torture Umbra as much as humanly possible. And we know Ballas, so of course Umbra was made into an Excalibur Umbra, rendering him unable to speak. A transference bolt was put in place to make sure he could not disobey Ballas. On top of that, his son came to visit him quite often, so the tall blue freak did something unthinkable. Ballas made Umbra kill his own son. Not only that, but he forced Umbra to relive that moment in his mind for the rest of his days. This somehow made him sentient, similarly to Stalker, except he didn't really speak. So he disappeared for a while, only to make his reemergence happen in the sacrifice, where he confronts Ballas and could have easily defeated him if it wasn't for the whole transference bolt placed on him. This allowed Ballas to stop him dead in his tracks and for Nata to easily blast him into pieces. Eventually, our operator rebuilt him, which caused a confrontation between the both of us. He escaped, but we kept following, and each time we came face to face with him, it allowed us to get a glimpse into his head, but it also let us become closer to Umbra, with our last meeting finally allowing us to link our minds and in a way become one. This allowed Umbra to be at peace because his trauma wasn't just his burden to bear. We eventually helped take that on by lifting some of the heavy weight right off of him, and together we defeated Ballas until Nata came and saved him. So we were close to killing Ballas, but just not close enough. Once again, no lore. Frost is a no lore type of guy, well, other than the fact that there was concept art of him in Dark Sector, but that probably doesn't matter here. Like every Warframe, Gara used to be a person. In fact, she actually knew about Warframes. In fact, again, she willingly became a Warframe. Nihil, the glassmaker, wanted her glassed because of the knowledge she held, but Ballas made her the glass warrior instead, out of pure spite for Nihil. A long time later, Gara does come to Earth, more specifically around the area of Cetus. There she became the Unum's closest companion. She didn't leave its side even when Lotus instructed her to do so. Eventually, a giant sentient started attacking the Unum, but only at night. Gara did the best she could to fight it off, but to no prevail. That's when the Unum helped Gara find the sentient by seeding Temple Kuva to the wildlife that connected it to the wildlife. During this time, they found out that this giant sentient used the Kuva to restore its ability to reproduce, which caused attacks on the Unum to continue. So Gara went and essentially blew it up with a bomb in her chest, sacrificing herself for the Unum. This scattered the giant sentient everywhere on the plains of Eidolon, as we can see when traveling around the area. After her death, the only sentients to remain on the plains was the Terralists. On top of that, Gara was part of the reason that Anko disappeared. He disappeared in order to prevent Gara from getting into the hands of the Grineer, in a way protecting the Warframe for us and stopping our enemy from gaining knowledge. For Garuda, all we know is that she is the Gore Queen. Yeah, so I guess she kills a lot. Yep, so yeah, maybe she bathes in their blood? I don't know. Gauss's story starts with an ancient Orcan tower on Ceres known as Ultra. This tower was essentially overthrown by rebels, and the Orcans wanted it back, so they started with sending Dax soldiers, yet this didn't really accomplish much. So when they failed, they sent in Gauss to handle the business. With his swiftness and incredible speed, Gauss captured the tower with ease. Doing this won him the title as the Saint of Ultra, and he also appeared in Grendel's story, which you will see in a second. After the collapse, Executor Karish went to the famine-stricken city of Rita on Europa. There he lived a great life, eating as much as he could while people watched and hoped to get his table scraps. Grendel, of course, didn't like this one bit, so he and Gauss showed up to liberate the city from Karish. We don't fully know why Gauss was with Grendel, but we presume that he intercepted patrols so that Grendel could just sneak away unnoticed. So Grendel went through the city eating all of Karish's sycophants and every Dax soldier he could find. He would eventually use his nurse ability to lead all of the people of Rita to storm Karish. Grendel led these people to the area where Karish actually was and used his masseter to smash open the door during one of the infamous feasts. This caused Karish to eventually flee, which allowed for the citizens of Rita to feast on everything left over. Grendel pursued Karish towards the mountains, and it wasn't said for sure, but it was pretty much hinted that Grendel actually ate him, but it wasn't said for sure. It wasn't actually said in the text, but he pretty much ate him. That is most likely what happened. And just one last thing to know when it comes to Grendel is he is actually inspired by the Grendel monster from the book Beowulf. I don't think they look the same though, and I haven't really read the book in a long while, so yeah, I don't know. So it is really unclear on how Gyre was created. There are a few ideas based off a real person, Gyra. She was a figurehead of the Zeramin, she had graceful movements and a gentle soul, but that's really all we know about her. She shares similar characteristics with Gyre, yet it is not proven that Gyra is Gyre, but that is a possibility, as Ballas could have easily turned her into a warframe. On the other hand, Gyre could just be based off of Gyra, as Ballas knew of Gyra and could have just struck inspiration off of it for, a new warframe. I personally believe he turned Gyra into Gyre, but, who knows? Maybe we'll learn something when her prime is released. Harrow doesn't really have much in terms of lore, but what we do know is that he was a priest, or, more likely he was a priest, and he was also the warframe for Rel, which Rel used him to help hold back the indifference in the Chains of Harrow quest. We can also guess that Harrow had assistants like Templars, and we also learned this by looking at the operator outfit that came with Harrow Prime. Yeah, so Hildryn doesn't have lore either. She could have possibly been a really buff Dax lady later before, her warframification, but really, I don't know. As for Hydroid, we also don't know much other than he is just correlated to the sea, and along with that, his prime trailer also hints that he may be the boogeyman of the sea, or something like that. Now, I kind of just want to say that Inaros' lore is sand, because, he loves sand. But no, I'll actually say his lore. So, we learned about Inaros in the Sands of Inaros quest. There, we learned that he used to serve the Golden Skymen, or pretty much just the Orcan. During this time, the Orcan were taking kids from the Sky Worshippers on Mars. Inaros, yeah, he did not like that one bit. So because of this, Inaros defected from the Orcan. Of course, they started sending in armies to eliminate Inaros. He managed to fend them off and protect this colony, which in turn, the Sky Worshippers started to worship him. Eventually, the infestation did make its way to Mars in the colony, and Inaros managed to protect the colony once more. making him even more worshipped by the Sky Worshippers. But unfortunately, he was damaged, and this left him unfit to keep protecting the colony, so his parts were stored in the sacred vessels that we see in the quest. We also learned that Baruuk was a part of this sacred colony, but he never witnessed Inaros with his eyes. He only heard stories. So, one day, Grenier came, and this happened a long time after the infestation, but they came and started raiding the colony. Baruuk prayed and prayed and prayed for Inaros' return, but he never came. This resulted in Baruuk resenting the Warframe. Eventually, through the events of this quest, Baruuk hears his late mother and learns of all the events that ever happened. And now that he's an adult, he just kind of comprehends it more. He understands. And that's when he finally forgives Inaros, claiming that he will finally rise once more, and giving us the blueprint so that we can build him and use them to help other people. The story for Ivara came from a historian known as Porvis and tells the tale of the Myrmidon. So the Myrmidon was known for its power to easily eliminate warframes and then essentially erase them from history. And yeah, that's pretty much it. But Ivara encountered this early on in her history and was sent on an emergency call from the Dax with two unknown warframe compatriots. This brought her face to face with the Myrmidon. So in the encounter, it easily destroyed her fellow warframes by nullifying their abilities and using an emerald-like light, which was most likely the Jade light, and she tried really hard to evade the Myrmidon's attacks, but it just didn't work out as she planned. So she started dueling the creature while it disabled some of her abilities. Grabbing her Artemis bow, she managed to start fending it off and also got its armor stripped. By dueling it out, this managed to reveal an Orcan face, which she swore to never kill, and the Myrmidon knew that. She then brought it in front of the Seven, only for it to drop dead after the Orcan took a device off its head. But just keep in mind, this instance, it was most likely a vessel, you being controlled by transference. It's not 100% guaranteed, but just keep that in mind. Afterwards, Ballas revealed that this was all a test, and Ivara actually passed. The test was to see what warframes were worthy enough to survive, and since she survived, she is still gonna be remembered. As for other warframes, they lost, so we will probably never see them again, and yeah. But who knows, maybe we might see them again, but probably not. So Jade's story starts as she was a human. She was in a forbidden relationship with someone named Soren, and at the time she was pregnant, which made this whole situation worse in the eyes of the Orcan. Now of course Ballas wasn't happy with this, so he figured out a good way to reprimand them and still be able to use them in the Orcan Empire. Ballas turned both Soren and Jade into warframes, then he split them up and he sent Jade to an execution chamber on Lua. As a warframe, she was able to harness the power of the Jade Light, so she was the being that executed people when needed, only to see endless amount of suffering. And during this time, it was thought that Jade was spending her time dreamless, yet she was able to dream about the time she could spend with her child. Also, Ballas taunted her as often as he could, and he would constantly say things about Soren being a warframe and how she'll never see him again, and even how she'll never have a baby. Eventually, Jade was given an operator and a task to go to Mars. Well, she took advantage of this and managed to put the operator to sleep, which gave her full control. So she escaped, and a lot more time actually went on, and the Orcan fall started. This gave Jade a perfect time to re-emerge. This led to her fateful encounter with Soren, who was now the Stalker. At the time, Stalker didn't recognize Jade, but Jade recognized him, so she ended up saving him, which he then brought her to a safe place on Uranus, which was a deep cave, but it later became Hunhow's tomb. Once safe, Jade decided to channel all of her energy to have the baby and prove Ballas wrong. So a ton more years pass and she falls ill. We see this in the Jade Shadows quest, where Stalker is trying to help Jade get better, unknowns to him that she was pregnant. So he tried many ways and even went to Arteno for help, which all we could do was help her have the baby. Eventually, during an invasion, her story ends once she gives birth to the little warframe kid. But, she always is at least giving her energy to both the kid and Stalker. Now, where do I start with Khora? Well, Khora's story doesn't really involve her per se, and more so takes a look into her Kavat, Venari, but it still somewhat involves Khora in a way. Now, this all starts with a corpus morphology specialist, Sigor Sava. They were tasked with reviving select species in the Orb-Valis region on Venus. He did this by decoding Orcan gene records. During his intense research, Sava found an Orcan-era Kavat, which was obviously Venari. She was locked away in a closet frozen in time, so he brought her to his lab and prepared her for dissection, though it never happened because somehow Venari willed herself back to life, which surely surprised the hell out of Sava. So she spent time just hanging out in Sava's lab, unfortunately in a cage. There she revealed some of her unique characteristics, which allowed Venari to memorize people's schedules, hence anticipating their arrival. This gave her the perfect time to break free and venture out into Orb-Valis by herself. She ended up murdering a bunch of infested areas for an unknown reason at the time. Sava went searching for her and tried joining a Corpus team who were deployed to a nearby infested hive, which unluckily caused the team's death by Venari before Sava got there. But during this little tussle, Venari got hurt and she ended up putting her trust in Sava and showed him her wounded side, which Sava did help patch her up. Eventually, Venari went back to Sava's lab without anyone knowing and left an ancient hand of her owner, Khora. At the time, this warframe was unknown to the Corpus and was not in their database. This later brought the Corpus to title Venari the Horror of the Hives and decided she is unfit to study, so they figured they would just go and kill her. Sava heard this and tried coming to the rescue with a tranquilizer gas, which in hindsight is pretty dumb, especially when most Corpus wear masks and are robots, but despite it not working, it gave Venari enough time to escape. In the process, Sava was captured and forced to give all of his research on Venari. I mean, he was also sentenced to death, but thanks to Venari, she gave Sava's lab assistant, Smokefinger, a set of keys. This allowed them to save Sava and bring them to escape. Their plan was to leave Venus because there was no way they could stay, but unfortunately the Corpus did catch up to them, and that was when Venari did the unthinkable and surprisingly sacrificed herself to save Sava and get him off-world. This would lead Sava to dedicate his life to find Khora's remains, which, funny enough, were found on Venus, fully intact, but was later shipped off-world by a Solaris rail agent. It could have possibly been Little Duck, but I think it's still unsure and not confirmed. But anyway, Sava later disappeared on the plains of Eidolon while searching for Khora. Funny enough, they were near the plains of Eidolon because a member of the Quills somehow acquired the remains of Khora and donated them to the sanctuary. Venari also followed by being somehow synthesized already before meeting one of Cephalon Samaris' sentinels. Yeah, so it may have seemed that she wanted that, she just probably wanted to be with her owner. And then one last thing to end off Khora's lore is she was possibly made in honor of Margulis. That's at least what I interpreted the Prime trailer as. It could have been interpreted some way else, I'm not sure. Koumei's story starts in a place known as Karifamil, which I most likely said that wrong, but it's fine. So this was later called Cetus, it's the place we know as Cetus, and one of the village founders of this area, Mersaw, would eventually venture into the sea, but he just never returned. His disappearance caused like a whole uproar, and all of the animals and even some of the Eidolons, they just became increasingly feral. That is when Koumei finally arrived. She actually became an oracle for Cetus by giving her knowledge on potential futures. This caused the Ostrons to start worshipping her. She would then deliver prophetic dreams called fate dreams. These dreams gave people warnings of disaster, and I am sure it also gave them good signs of luck. It pretty much gave people a glimpse into a better ending for themselves. All this was possible because of the 5 fates, which was her special dice. Depending on what the dice roll, it can give different fates, as you can see in these pictures or on the wiki, which I will not go over all of them at this time because it is quite a bit. But this overall made Koumei the oracle that everyone worshipped. I do want to mention something so that I don't potentially miss anything. I did hear that there's a chance that Koumei abandoned Gara in the Unum when the giant sentient attacked. At the moment, I am not sure if this is theory or not, but being that I cannot find anything on it, I will just guess it as theory, but I still think this is worth mentioning. So Kullervo was a criminal in a sense, even though partially some of these crimes could have been just in his own head and he actually did them, but he is punishing himself for it. But at the moment, we're just going to consider him a criminal. He was convicted of 7 crimes, first being murder. He killed an Orcan in order to gain favor from one of his favorite executors. Second, he got convicted of cowardice. As the Orcan started to slay his defective Warframe brethren, he did nothing but watch. Third, he was convicted of flight from custody. The executors wanted Kullervo dead, so he tried avoiding capture from the Dax, only for him to end up killing the very person he was trying to rescue during that time, his quote-unquote mother, Archimedean Aniki. After this, he ended up slaying some Dax, earning him this crime. Fourth is treason. Once the Tenno returned from the Zerman, Kullervo started attacking various Orcan areas for an unknown reason. Fifth is espionage. I believe when the new generation of Warframes were made, Kullervo essentially just whispered bad thoughts into them. This essentially helped them act up against the Orcan, or that's what we believe, and it could be said this kind of helped ignite the collapse even more. Sixth is another count of treason. During the collapse, he may have not been solely responsible, but he still gets the count of treason for whatever reason. Finally, seventh is attempted regicide. He attempted to kill the executor he liked, which was one of the 7 Balis. He failed and eventually got captured and imprisoned. Eventually, Kullervo ended up in Deviri, and he made his way there in a spitting ball of fire. This created an island with 7 different prison cells for each individual crime he committed, with a warden to watch over him. It's insinuated that the warden who watches over Kullervo is the conceptual embodiment of Balis formed from Kullervo's guilty conscience, but with that he lives the rest of his days out in Deviri. I also read some things saying he might be one of the first Warframes made from a person and that is, still alive and never got an operator, similar to Excalibur Umbra, but Umbra is kind of dead, so take that as you will. Lavos served as a warden to the prison of Dabaoth Khora on Venus. There he encountered one prisoner, Archimedean Yavi, who possessed skills and knowledge in alchemy and transmutation. Now the Orcan probably had some dumb made up reason why they didn't like the transmutation stuff, but in reality they kinda just feared it. They feared it because they believed the lower class would use it to rise up against them. So that's why they stopped Archimedean Yavi. Weirdly enough, they also figured he would somehow survive the Jade Light, so that's why he just got imprisoned instead of executed. But it didn't really stop him from doing his craft, because during this time, he reportedly whispered weird things to Lavos. During this time, he also got beat a lot, and it was all because of Lavos, of course. And being beaten caused him to have a lot of blood out of him, of course, so he used the blood and dirt to draw some weird symbols on the prison wall, and these symbols were thought to be demonic symbols and snakes. His behavior eventually became more and more bizarre as time goes on, causing him to get his sentence changed and executed by cellular reversal, which essentially turns him into nothing. Lavos was the one who was going to do this execution for the Orcan, so we acquired some ceremonial garb for this whole occasion, but after he got it, he kind of stopped beating the prisoners. He learned, possibly from Yavi's whispering, that Yavi's writings and drawings were about evolution and healing. And after this revelation, Lavos just changed, especially when it came to execute Yavi. Lavos started executing Yavi with ease. This made all of the surrounding people extremely happy until they looked a little closer. That's when they saw that Lavos used the power of transmutation to transmute Yavi into a serpent and put it on his left arm. He then did the same thing but with his own flesh on his right arm. Doing this, Lavos eventually massacred all of the Orcan jailers and pretty much everyone in the jail. No one survived this massacre other than the floor cleaner Bekrin Zoft. As far as I'm aware, no one knows why, but maybe he was an old friend of Lavos, or maybe somehow avoided it, we don't know. And it is said that Lavos himself probably was the one who transmuted himself into a prime version, so you can take that part as you will. Limbo's lore, in my opinion, isn't fully fleshed out, but it is a little bit there. All we really know is that his parts were scattered because of miscalculations while crossing between the normal plane and the void, sort of in a rift dimension that he most likely discovered. Other than that, Limbo Theorem didn't really tell us much. Yeah, so Loki don't got lore. I mean, he could obviously be based off of Norse mythology since his abilities are pretty similar to what the god Loki would do, but honestly, that's really all we got for him. Mag doesn't have much general lore, but through the Mag Prime Codex, we see a little glimpse into something Mag Prime experienced. We know that her, possibly with her operator, made it to Tau. Other warframes like Excalibur Prime also made it, as we saw in the old piece, but Mag Prime is the only one that really mentions it with the help of our codex, though keep in mind that it doesn't fully say it is the Tau system, but it most likely is. Mesa doesn't have any lore, though she was the warframe infested by Amalgam Alad V in the Patient Zero quest, so go ahead and take that as you will. As far as I'm aware, we don't know much about Mirage in general, but during the Hidden Messages quest, we learned that she was fighting off sentience as Lotus told her to retreat. This essentially wound up with Mirage getting captured and later disintegrated. Also, during her time in the Orcan era, she potentially changed a lot of her abilities or original design despite what Ballas had planned for her, but that's pretty much the sum of her story there. Necros is the warframe of fear and death. Yeah, that's pretty much it for his lore, and I actually think Ballas really likes him. That's at least what I understood anyway. To tell Nesh's story in a more general understanding, this all takes place in a farmland of Raishantur. It's unsure what the specific relationship is between this farmland and Warframe, other than the events that take place, but it is said to be the location of a ton of relics containing Nesh's pieces, which would be turned in for food or for worship or even out of fear. For the worship part, it was really the children that worship Nesha. They actually have a cult-like clan that at least attempts to protect the farmland since other defenses were too expensive for the people living there. One reason they chose Nesha as the clan's protector is based on his courage, which is also the reason they worship him. But all of this happens in correlation with the massacre of Raishantur. This started after the collapse and after Parvos Grandum's attempted assassination, and without a proper government or leadership, this farmland just became a lawless place, only to eventually be overrun by the Corpus, who turned most of the farmers into servants. Oh, and when these servants tried to rebel, they were just turned into fertilizer? Like, yeah, the Corpus just straight up killed someone if they rebelled, and yeah, they were just turned into fertilizer. That's just crazy to think about. So anyway, this caused the population to obviously decrease and led to the children of Raishantur to form. They started planning and even making their own weapons out of the old junk they could find. So one day, the children started to attack their oppressor. It was nearly a death sentence, because the Corpus got ready to fire upon them until miraculously fire was set upon the farmland. It was Nesha who came to save the day and defeat the Corpus, but during all the chaos, he also healed and helped the kids escape, and of course not be hurt. This wouldn't have been known if someone named Jenna Zasprin didn't encounter a boy wearing a Nesha helmet. He claimed all of this happened, and with the only proof being that after the massacre, relics, spears, and Sindanas were mysteriously placed in the children's temple of Nesha. But that is pretty much everything we know with the massacre of Raishantur. One thing to know is that this warframe is based off the Chinese folklore of Nesha, which is a deity of protection or something like that. Yeah, that title does go perfect with the lore of this warframe anyway. So what we know about Nidus is that he has a special connection to the Helminth and the Myconians. The Myconians are a whole other thing to talk about in another time, but essentially they discovered a Nidus blueprint relic which allowed for a hybrid infestation to be made, which could somehow be involved with how Nidus is linked to the Helminth. Nova's story starts with pirates, specifically Wholesome Gyre, who was notorious for raiding solar rails. But he made a deal with the Orcan where all Orcan ships were off limits, possibly because the Orcan are selfish, of course. So this eventually led into a meeting with Nova because he actually lured her onto a ship, which was proven through security footage on a Orcan vessel known as the Masker's Theodolite, which was most likely the ship she was lured on. So Gyre was hired to trap Nova on a ship and take her out. This risked nearly 11,000 lives because he jettisoned all of the escape pods and the antimatter core, which caused the reactor to stop. This was his plan to defeat Nova. To save the ship, Nova would have to sacrifice herself, but she didn't want to do that, so she devised a clever plan. So Nova began disabling all of Gyre's cameras. By using the technicians, Nova got the blast doors overridden, which essentially allowed Nova to open a wormhole to the bridge. This is where she came face to face with Gyre and his team. So she quickly dispatched his whole squad with her sniper, leaving Gyre as the key to her plan. She tossed Gyre into the reactor chamber using her wormholes, then shut the blast doors with the help of the technicians. In the room, Gyre started to go Nova, allowing for him to turn into an antimatter fuel, inevitably saving the ship. By trying to kill Nova, he caused his own death. And that's a tiny bit of just a short story, but that's pretty much what Nova all did. She saved a ship, I guess. Yeah, so Nyx and Oberon don't really got lore. I mean, Oberon possibly was the guardian of the forest, but yeah, maybe he'll get some lore with his rework, though I do doubt it. And Nyx is just kind of there. In concept art, she was supposed to be a female Excalibur, so take that as you will. Octavia was the one to sound the ceremonial Naga drums, which brought about the Tenno's victory over the Sentients in the Old War, although some could say sounding these drums most likely led to the collapse of the Orkan as well, essentially making Octavia the bringer of the collapse. Araxia was Albrecht and Trotti's guardian warframe during his stay in Deviri. She was then left behind in Scholar's Landing, one of the lost islands that mysteriously vanished after Entrati left Deviri. Some assume that this was because the Indifference took it, or some people could assume that it was linked with Albrecht, so when he left, it just disappeared. But I don't really know how that would work, so yeah, neither of these are really confirmed, so it doesn't really matter anyway. So with Scholar's Landing disappearing, Araxia went with it, as she was for some reason left behind by Entrati. This is where the Indifference comes in, and it just kind of drove Araxia mad because of the constant whispers from the Indifference. But then we eventually meet her in the Isle Weaver update, which unfortunately we weren't able to save her or kill her or set her free, since this is a loop, forever cementing her just staying there for the rest of her life, I think. I'm pretty sure. Protea's story is with the Corpus for the most part, so Parvos Grandum struck a deal with the Orkan to get him Protea as a guardian. Well, it was smart for him to do that, as the Corpus board of directors tried to assassinate him on his ship by sabotaging his void drive, which should have easily ended him. But Protea stepped in and used her powers, which brought her and Grandum to a temporal prison in the void. There, Protea eventually turns into a specter by using her powers too much, and that's when we see her in the Deadlock Protocol, as she continues to be Grandum's right-hand gal. Korvax is quite a unique warframe, to say the least. He was made by the infamous Albrecht and Trotty. He made this for the chosen operator, which happens to be us. But he also made this for us to fight off the Murmur and other forces of the Indifference. And it's sad to say, but he possibly could have made it for some other reason. I don't know. Revenant, similar to Gara, also starts on Earth, more specifically around Cetus, even more specifically in the plains of Eidolon. In fact, he appeared at the location of Gara Tot Lake, but he wasn't known as the Revenant, but rather he was known as the Warden. He appeared at the lake to fight off some sentients, as many warframes do. But one day, he started to get overwhelmed by all the sentients. This is when he discovered that the sentient was using him to reform itself. When the Warden learned this, he decided to seal off the lake and spent his time anchoring the sentient with him. Now keep in mind, the sentient I would assume means the Terror List or Eidolon, since this is after Gara's story, although it could be the Ropalo list, as you may hear about a little bit later. This essentially allowed the Warden to get infused with eldritch energies from the sentient. This also made him known as the Lost One, but eventually Nakak receives the Mask of the Lost One from Anko. She sells it to the Tenno while instructing them to wear it in the plains of Eidolon at night. This leads to the events of the Mask of the Revenant quest. Eventually, they see a large spectral silhouette of an Eidolon, which was the Ropa Lolist, which it was indicated that the Revenant would be key to an upcoming threat, which I figured would be the Ropa Lolist, but that never came to pass. Now, it could just be used in the future for something story related, but honestly, at this point, I kind of doubt it. But after seeing this silhouette, Nakat gets a vision from the Unum which tells us Revenant's story, which I already kind of mentioned. The vision shows us that Revenant was once the Warden who was lost to time fighting sentience, which now makes Revenant the mask for the sentient he tried holding back, which gave him all those powers, which now makes him half Eidolon, half Warframe. So Rhino specifically doesn't necessarily have lore per se, but there is something related to him. So a long time ago, slightly after the Tenno returned from the Zariman, a few Orcan researchers, one of which was named Davis, went to a facility on Lua. There was a Rhino Warframe on the loose, and at the time, the Warframes were still very feral and kind of their prototype in a sense. This probably happened when the Warframes were moved to Lua for studying and dissecting purposes. Yeah, it ate someone, so that is something. It's weird to imagine that these early versions of Warframes still possibly had a mouth, or maybe it was the infestation that consumed it, most likely that one, but we don't know. So anyway, Rhino started chasing some of the researchers throughout the facility, and eventually these researchers arrived to the cell of the Tenno, which happened to calm down Rhino. This in turn led to the research to begin for somatic links and transference, making Rhino the reason this all happened. Kind of. Saren, just like other Warframes, don't have much for lore, though there is the possibility that she was made to help fix the Earth, but from what I understand, that isn't fully confirmed. It's just kind of a theory or a thought out there. All of Sevagoth's lore comes from the Call of Tempestari quest, or at least as far as I'm aware. Now, Sevagoth was the captain of the Tempestari, and it was a railjack well known for its rescue missions. One day, this railjack got lost to the void during a void storm during a rescue mission. But this wasn't the last rescue mission the Tempestari would go on, because the Shadow of Sevagoth was sent out to pilot the Tempestari. The Shadow had one quest, which was to search for Sevagoth's body in the void storm. Both during this time and before it was lost to the void, the Tempestari made an enemy of Captain Vala Glarios, the sole survivor of the Lucretia platform, a place that the Tempestari ran into during one of its famous rescue missions. Vala was left drifting in space for a long time and sought revenge. That's when our Tenno arrives. We end up gaining the trust of the Shadow and help find its body. In the process, we go head to head with Vala and inevitably banished her to the Grandum Void. This allowed us to find the body of Sevagoth in peace with the help of Cephalon Sai and the Shadow. Once we did find the body, we gave the Warframe and the Shadow a proper ship burial by launching him back into the Void. Now, the Stalker. So yes, if you did not know, the Stalker is a Warframe. For what I'm aware, he doesn't have an operator, and that would just completely be mind-blowing if he did, but he most likely doesn't. So he is also a fully sentient Warframe that can actually talk, just a little bit, which is impressive by looking at other Warframes' history. So Stalker's story somewhat coincides with Jade's, as he was a low Orcan guardian named Soren. He was in a relationship with Jade, and they happened to be having a kid, which the Orcan deemed as taboo. So Ballas caught them and turned them both into Warframes, as he does. This is when Soren turned into Stalker. He continued under the Orcan in hopes he could eventually reunite with Jade. During this time, he learned that the Tenno planned to assault and hunt the Orcan. Unfortunately for them, he failed to warn them, and at the collapse, the Tenno also decided to hunt the Stalker, starting his hatred for them even more. During this time, Jade and Stalker reunited. Even though Jade recognized Stalker, he in fact did not. So they escaped to the cave that will later be known as Hunhao's grave. There, he continued to take care of Jade, as she, in his eyes, essentially hibernated in a sense. This is when he started to hunt the Tenno. Eventually, Hunhao retreats to this cave the Stalker is in, and it kind of results in them teaming up in the second dream to reveal the reservoir. While there, Stalker had the opportunity to kill us and our operator, but he eventually just hesitated, wondering if he himself had an operator, or if he was the Warframe. but he came back still planning to kill us in the orbiter, only to lose again and vanish. The next time we would see him would be in the New War, where the Narmer forces started to hunt him down. We learn this because our Drifter goes to speak with Hunhow and the Stalker. This resulted in two things: Stalker almost killing us with the hate, and obtaining the coolest bow ever, the Nautaruk. He also helps us defeat a few of the Archons, but then after that, we just kind of part ways. That brings us to the Jade Shadows quest, where Hunhow actually tries convincing the Stalker to make amends with the Tenno, but he refuses because how else would we get his weapons from him, and because he is full of hate, and not the weapon. So Jade starts deteriorating. Unbeknownst to Stalker, she was actually giving birth. That makes Stalker frantic, and he tries helping her. It did lead to him asking for our operator's help once again, but that didn't really do much. We did help Jade give birth to the baby, but that was while Stalker was defending the area from a Corpus threat. But it didn't stop Jade from giving birth and unfortunately passing away, so Stalker takes the baby and takes on a bunch of Corpus while holding it. Eventually the Corpus sees fire, allowing him to flee to Lua, where he recalls some of his memories and eventually names his kid either Sirius or Orion. Now, a few other things to mention is that he did get more powers related to Jade. He also has been seen in Deviri, as we can use them with transference, which doesn't have an actual lore reason why. There probably will never be one, and I don't think it really matters. But anyway, he also has 6 acolytes that resemble a Warframe: Angst as Valkyr, Malice as Frost, Mania as Loki, Misery as Necros, Torment as Mesa, and Violence as Limbo. They also have other resemblances with other Warframes, but these are pretty much the main ones. Stynax's story kind of starts with a Corpus guy known as the Philanthropist. Yeah, I know, it's a very scary name, but this guy runs into 2 siblings, Arya and Darrow. They were trapped on a ship, but the Philanthropist arrived and saved them, promising a safe home and plenty of education. The Philanthropist had a cult, and when every kid got of age, they would participate in their Ascension Day, which would make it so they were never seen again. This would make Arya and Darrow known as the Philanthropist Chosen. With Darrow being the older one, he was taken first, but sometime later, before Arya's Ascension Day and after her brother's, Arya made a large field of crops into a lotus flower, which presumably made Stynax come into contact with her. Somehow this made him Arya's protector, which he gifted her a rescue beacon. Well, finally, her Ascension Day did arrive, and the Philanthropist revealed his plan. He was making an infested known as the Leviathan and was planning to use Arya as a main component, like he tried to do with the other Chosen. This Leviathan was made of many of the past Chosen. After hearing this, Arya was shocked and decided to use Stynax's beacon, calling him to that area. So once he arrived, he started distracting the Leviathan as the Philanthropist started piloting it out of desperation. In this chaos, Arya noticed Darrow in the mass of the Leviathan. This caused her to scream frantically, which managed, somehow, to wake up her brother. Darrow managed to hold the Philanthropist by his throat, distracting him even more, and I believe at this time Darrow and every other Chosen inside that amalgamation was pretty much mindless zombies, so it kind of works because Stynax had the idea to rally every one of the Chosen and gather them up to smother and tear apart the Philanthropist, giving Stynax the perfect chance to strike the final blow. And then after all of this ended, Stynax left, but before he left, Arya tried giving him the beacon, but he declined. So now she's just out there somewhere with a Stynax beacon, so that's something. So Temple was another Warframe of Albrecht and Trotti's design, kind of, not really. So Temple probably wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Entrati, because this Warframe's design was made by Ballas, but he actually wasn't created because Ballas was too scared to make this Warframe, mainly because of his unruly behavior. So in turn, Albrecht used the special strain of infestation for the Temple Warframe. So Temple was made with the Protoframe Flare back in 1999. Flare learned from Kaya that they must eventually turn into Temple. And you know, since Kaya traveled to the future and saw that Temple was a Warframe there, it was quite obvious that this happened to Temple. Now, this could mean that Kaya and Arthur and all of the other Protoframes will turn into full Warframes, but that is yet to be confirmed, I think. We also learn from Flare and Kaya that eventually Flare, when they are temple, will have to find a comet and wait on it until the Naga drums were rung, which most likely is a crap ton of years later. And that's pretty much how temple gets to the future, just by waiting, which sounds incredibly boring. Titania's story more so revolves around an Orcan-era researcher from Earth named Sylvana. Sylvana's goal was to save her planet Earth from its current state, but of course it wasn't going to be saved in one day. It took quite a bit of time, so this led to Sylvana getting recruited by Margulis for the transference research. This worked out perfectly because Margulis was Sylvana's hero, but this whole project got kind of ruined by Ballas, of course. He came in and ended up warping their project into a Warframe project. This Warframe was designed for destruction, the exact thing that Sylvana did not want. Knowing Ballas' true nature, this was probably intentional, but as far as I'm aware, it's unclear whether it is or is not, but it most likely is. But anyway, Titania was born, and this caused Sylvana to defect from the Orcan. With her, she stole a few things along with some somatics. This enabled her plan to save Earth. She started to seed one big forest, which would later turn into the Silver Grove, which all of this is from that particular quest, by the way. This is where she became one of the first people that was not a Tenno to use transference. She used what knowledge she had and learned from Margulis to permanently bond with her forest. Well, eventually Ballas did find out about the defection and sent Dax soldiers to destroy the forest, but weirdly, Ballas' creation Titania showed up and started to save the forest, despite how much Sylvana despised her. This later brings us to the present, where our operator works with the New Loka syndicate to speak to the Silver Grove. We learn many things while New Loka learns something more important. They learn that they share ideals with Sylvana and inevitably vow to bring back Titania, and then that is when we get Titania. Trinity doesn't have lore, though she could have been a medic during the Old War or Orcan era, but that's just really it. So the Valkyr we normally see isn't technically the normal Valkyr. In fact, her original form, not counting the Prime, is the Gersemi skin. The way she looks now is all because of Alad V. She got captured and tortured by this corpus-made man. And yeah, this resulted in her getting restrained and harshly experimented on in a lab on Jupiter. There, Alad V also took off her skin, so yeah, that's a little demented, especially when he used it as the outer armor for his Zanuka Robodog. Alad V also did add forearm restraints and gauntlets onto Valkyr's arm, which, according to the wiki, may have been inspired by her Prime design. This left Valkyr visibly destroyed and enraged, yet it did enhance the knowledge on Warframes for the Corpus. It's also said that her abilities, like Hysteria, reflect her madness, and to me it does make a little bit of sense, since the Prime does the exact same abilities and makes the exact same noises, and it was also tortured, but instead they were tortured by the Orcan. This could just be a bunch of nonsense, so that could probably just be ignored, but pretty much Valkyr got tortured a lot. Vauban doesn't have any guaranteed lore as far as I'm aware. There is some speculation since he is somehow involved with the Corpus, possibly to keep an eye on the Corpus, but from what I could tell, he doesn't really have anything. And Volt also doesn't have any lore, but you know, I would like to think that he was a fisherman with how useful his passive ability is for fishing. So Varuna was the guardian of Circulus, a Yuvan temple located on Lua for the Orcan. This place was made for continuity rituals, where Orcan would essentially just put their mind into another body to continue their survival. But there was something different about Circulus that made it better for these rituals. It had void conjunctions, but it didn't make it easy to do the rituals because of the weird manifestations that appeared. So that's why they have Varuna, just so she can destroy every last one of these. To help her, she had a pack of 4 wolves. Dinar, the shadowed and stealthy, he provides Varuna with the vigilant gift of stealth, that she may only take her enemies by surprise. Raksh, the invigorating defender, Varuna's own loyal guardian, he ferociously guards his mistress and other pack members. Lycanth, the stalwart brother, with his hunt he provides, becoming the soul of the pack, and Ulfrun, the fierce and fanged, the most formidable of the pack. His strength is legendary, and I definitely did not steal that from the wiki. So anyway, during the collapse, Veruna went after the Juven clerisy executor Tvol, which at the time they were trying to exact continuity to escape. In fact, he was using Albrecht and Trotty's infamous grimoire to conduct the ritual. What makes it worse was Tvol was going to do the ritual on a Tenno, but it got a little disrupted when these manifestations started to appear. So Veruna and her pack started tearing through these things. Unfortunately, each wolf did die. It's very tragic, I know, but having grown close to her pack, she was filled with grief. So to stop Tvol, Veruna managed to get into the continuity ritual, causing her to recombine with her fallen wolf pack, bringing her to her current state. So she destroyed Tvol with her wolves and left with the operator, which some people speculate that the operator might have been her own operator, but we can't really tell at this time. Wisp and Wukong don't really have much lore as far as I'm aware, which honestly I thought these ones would really have some lore, especially since Wukong is based on the Monkey King from the Chinese stories. But you know, it is what it is. Zaku was essentially born in the void from 3 different warframes. He's an amalgam of those warframes, which happen to each be a beneficiary of the Entrade family, which is a reason why you get Zaku from Deimos bounties, or could just be that they said, oh well, he's somewhat correlated to Deimos, so here you go. But it's unknown what warframes made up Zaku. They were most likely lost to time, so chances of seeing them may be very, very, very slim, but I guess we never know. So yeah, Ureli became a warframe because she essentially taunted Ballas and he didn't like that. So she was a Juven in a Juven theater. This is where Ballas noticed her, and she was actually considered for continuity by Ballas, though he didn't really appreciate her slight disrespect of Orcan customs and beliefs, and even the sacred Kuva was mocked in just a way or some way we don't really know. Because of the insults, Ureli was just turned into a warframe. Eventually, her story continues in the Wave Rider quest. She in fact was actually the savior of all these children in the quest. So this starts with Volgren, a child slaver, and Ureli just kind of showed up and started fighting him. Weirdly, in the middle of the fight though, Ureli just kind of left his base, which made him chase right after her, and her just kind of bringing him away from the kids. That was the whole purpose of this anyway. So they just kind of ran in circles presumably, and during this pursuit, Volgren ended up breaking his whip, which left him just a little bit defenseless, but it didn't really matter because they both became exhausted. And seeing Ureli doing all this, the kids watched from afar, and they ended up rising up against their slaver. But they didn't defeat him because, yeah, they're just kids. So Ureli came in and eventually blasted him straight up into the sky with her water jets, then ending the reign of Volgren. Her story was passed down in a graphica called Wave Rider number 1 that you of course unlock throughout the Wave Rider quest. So one more thing to mention is Ureli was actually the originator of the K-Drive, kind of in a way, which eventually made the Vent kids want to follow her even more. And for the last warframe, Zephyr. She don't got lore, so yeah. But I mean, her name is derived from one of the 4 anemoi in Greek legend Zephyrus, but I mean, that's really nothing, so she'll just be that little flappy bird in my eyes. So that was every single warframe out there in the game at the moment, so I hope you enjoyed. I also hope I didn't miss anything, because that would be very, very, very tragic. So anyway, I want to thank you for watching. Maybe like, maybe subscribe. I don't really give a crap, and also maybe consider joining the Discord in the link below. I also don't really give a crap. So with that being said, I will just see you in the next video.